In the summer of 1867, the people of Sedalia, Missouri, whispered about a boy who seemed ordinary at first glance, but whose presence was always followed by death. His name was Timothy Caldwell, 8 years old, pale blue eyes, a polite smile that never quite reached them. To most, he was just another orphan left behind by the Civil War, but to those who looked closer, he was something far more disturbing. Over 6 months, 3 neighbors died in strange accidents. Dozens of animals turned up mutilated in ways no predator could explain. And somehow, Timothy was always the one to discover the bodies. Always helpful, always calm. Too calm for a child his age. The only physician in the area, Dr. Samuel Harding, began to take notes. He filled entire journals with observations about this boy, details that unsettled him so much, he sealed them away for decades. When the journals were finally opened, they told a story that still has no answer in modern science. Because what Harding described was not misfortune, not trauma, not the result of a cruel childhood. What he recorded was something darker, something that suggested evil itself could live inside a child. Missouri in 1867 was already a haunted place. Fathers dead on battlefields, mothers lost to disease, children raised by strangers in crumbling farms. People knew tragedy, but Timothy Caldwell was different. His story was not about survival or grief. It was about calculation, about death delivered with the precision of an experiment. What you're about to hear is not folklore. It's one of the most disturbing historical case studies ever documented in America, and it begins with a boy who seemed like any other, until you noticed the way he watched, and the way disaster seemed to follow wherever he went. In the spring of 1866, a small boy carrying a cloth bag walked up the dirt path to his uncle's farmhouse. His name was Timothy Caldwell, and on that day, he entered a world already heavy with grief. His father had died in the war, his mother from disease, and now Timothy had nowhere else to go. His uncle Thomas, hardened by years of loss, saw in the boy both a burden and a chance for labor. His wife Sarah, sharp-tongued and childless, was no gentler. Yet to the neighbors, it seemed a story of family taking care of its own, a gesture of survival in a community where everyone was scraping by. What they couldn't see was how unnatural Timothy seemed from the very first moment. He was small for his age, pale skin that burned under the Missouri sun, and hair so fair his aunt kept it cropped short to fight lice. But it was his manner that unsettled people. He was polite, almost rehearsed in his politeness. "Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am." Always obedient, never complaining, never asking for more than was given. To the casual eye, he was the ideal child. But in that lack of play, that absence of the small rebellions that define childhood, something felt wrong. Dr. Samuel Harding, the only trained physician in the county, met Timothy by chance when the boy came to town for supplies with his uncle. Harding had seen hundreds of children, most shy, restless, or fidgeting. Timothy was none of those things. He looked directly into Harding's eyes, answering every question in perfect tone. No awkwardness, no hesitation. The doctor later wrote that it was like being studied himself, as though the boy were cataloging him the way a surgeon might observe a specimen. That moment, fleeting as it was, stayed with Harding, nagging at the back of his mind long after their encounter. Neighbors, too, began to notice the boy's strangeness. Mrs. Patterson, who lived on the adjoining property, often saw him in the fields. From sunrise to sunset, he worked without pause. No wandering, no play, just steady, machine-like labor. She told her husband that it wasn't natural for a child to carry himself like that, as if joy itself had been cut out of him. Even her chickens seemed to react. Whenever Timothy walked near the fence line, the birds would squawk and cluster together as though sensing something they could not escape. In a town already soaked in sorrow, most people dismissed these small details as quirks, the scars of an orphan's hard life. But patterns have a way of showing themselves over time, and as Timothy settled into the Caldwell farm, those patterns would grow darker. What began as a boy with sad eyes and perfect manners soon became something else entirely, something that not even the most rational minds of the 19th century could explain. Little Mary Fletcher was the first. She was only 5 years old, known for her laughter that carried through the blacksmith's yard and into the dusty streets of Sedalia. One hot afternoon in August of 1866, she wandered toward the shallow creek that wound between several farms. Hours later, Timothy appeared at her family's doorstep, his clothes damp, his voice calm. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, "I found Mary by the creek. She's not breathing." When the search party rushed to the water, they found her face down in just 18 inches of water. Tragic, yes, but children drowned often in rural Missouri. At least, that's 3 weeks later, another accident. Henrik Len, an old Norwegian logger, was found broken at the bottom of Devil's Bluff. He had tended his beehives along that cliff for years, never once stumbling. Yet Timothy was again the first to arrive with news. "I saw his hat caught on a thorn bush," the boy explained evenly. When Harding inspected the body, he noticed something peculiar. A scattering of dead bees clustered unnaturally around the corpse. The hives above were untouched. Timothy, when asked, offered a simple theory that Henrik had been stung and lost his footing. Logical enough on the surface, but Harding felt the same chill as before. By September, coincidence had stretched too thin. 6-year-old Jacob Mills vanished from outside his cabin, sparking a desperate search. Timothy joined eagerly, showing remarkable stamina and knowledge of the woods. On the 4th day, he told Jacob's father, "I think I found something." The boy led them to an abandoned well, half buried under brush. Jacob was at the bottom, barely alive, and though they pulled him out, he died within hours. Harding stayed close during those final moments and caught Timothy watching, his lips moving as if in prayer, his eyes locked on the dying child, not in grief but in careful study. When Jacob breathed his last, Timothy's expression barely shifted. If anything, Harding thought he saw the faintest trace of satisfaction. 3 deaths in less than 2 months. 3 times Timothy appeared at the center. The town whispered about misfortune, about God testing them, but Harding, turning page after page in his journal, saw the pattern emerging. This was no child battered by fate. This was something deliberate. And the scariest part? No one else seemed to notice. Dr. Harding had treated men torn apart by musket fire, had stitched wounds under cannon smoke, had stared into the eyes of soldiers who lived only minutes longer than they should have. He believed himself hardened, immune to horror. But Timothy Caldwell unsettled him in ways the battlefield never had. After Jacob Mills's death, the doctor could no longer ignore the boy's presence at every tragedy. What gnawed at him wasn't just coincidence, it was Timothy's composure. Where others wailed, Timothy observed. Where grief left families broken, Timothy's pale eyes watched, memorizing details as though each death were part of a lesson only he could understand. Harding began asking quiet questions around the county, cloaking his interest beneath his role as physician. What he heard was a tapestry of strange misfortunes radiating outward from the Caldwell farm. Chickens discovered with cleanly broken necks. Pigs left with wounds that seemed intentional rather than accidental. Calves strangled in ways no farmer could explain. Each farmer told their story reluctantly, blaming foxes, bad luck, or the hand of God. Yet again and again, when pressed, they admitted to seeing Timothy nearby. Always polite, always respectful, waving as he passed their fences. A boy too well behaved to be suspected of anything worse than wandering. Harding's hands trembled as he turned to a newer set of sketches. These were not animals. They were people, children and adults alike, drawn with recognizable features. Mary Fletcher, her body positioned exactly as it had been found in the creek. Henrik Lenn, sprawled at the base of Devil's Bluff. Jacob Mills, curled in the bottom of a well with chilling notes about dehydration and consciousness. It was evidence not of coincidence, but of design. Timothy hadn't simply been present at these deaths. He had orchestrated them, planned them, recorded them. The air in the cave felt suffocating. Harding realized he was standing inside the boy's laboratory, a place where death was studied with the same cold focus as any medical college. But this was not a student of healing. This was a student of cruelty. And worse, the drawing suggested Timothy's ambitions were only growing. The human figures were not finished, as though he was preparing for more trials. Harding left the cave that evening knowing the truth. The polite orphan with pale blue eyes was not a victim of misfortune. He was the author of it. And as much as the doctor wanted to believe he could protect the town with his discovery, he also understood the cruel reality. Without evidence acceptable to the law, Timothy Caldwell would remain free. And until then, every person in Sedalia lived within the reach of an 8-year-old experimenter who had no limits. Dr. Harding knew the cave changed everything. The bones, the sketches, the notes written in Timothy's careful hand. This was no longer suspicion. It was proof, though proof gathered in a way no court would accept. What judge, in 1867, would believe that an 8-year-old child was capable of designing deaths with such precision? Harding understood the law would dismiss him as unstable, haunted by the war, but he also knew something worse. Timothy was escalating. E-Boy wasn't content with accidents or hidden experiments. His next subject would be chosen deliberately. Harding decided to confront him. On a gray November morning, he asked Timothy to walk with him to check the livestock. Away from the farmhouse, Harding revealed what he had seen. The boy's reaction was unlike anything Harding expected. No denial, no fear. Timothy listened with calm interest, occasionally nodding as if confirming the doctor's observations. When Harding finished, Timothy simply said, "You're not going to tell anyone." It was not a plea, not even a question. It was a statement. Harding asked why he believed that, and for the first time, Timothy smiled, an expression unsettling in its authenticity. "Because no one would believe you," he replied, "and because you're curious about what I'll do next." The words pierced Harding more than threats ever could, because the boy was right. Curiosity was the doctor's weakness. He had spent months cataloging Timothy's behavior, trying to fit him into some medical category. Now, standing face to face, Harding realized Timothy was cataloging him in return. The pattern deepened inside Harding's own visits to the farm. Thomas nursed his bad back, Sarah coughed from the damp air, and Timothy hovered nearby, watching every examination. The doctor noticed the boy's interest in anatomy, his unnerving questions asked in a tone too calm for their content. "How do you know if someone is really dead?" he once asked. "Sometimes people only look like they're sleeping." Another day. "How long does it take for someone to stop breathing if their throat is pressed?" Harding responded cautiously, testing him with false answers. Timothy never argued, never corrected, but his eyes revealed a boy filing each fragment of information away like a student memorizing scripture. These weren't idle questions. They were clinical, detached, as if Timothy were assembling a library of methods, building a private understanding of suffering and death. Harding noted the resemblance to soldiers he had seen during the war, the rare few who killed not from duty or desperation, but from something darker, something innate. That same absence of empathy, compressed into the body of a child, stood before him at every visit. By October, Harding's journals overflowed with descriptions and suspicions, but suspicion wasn't evidence. He had nothing he could bring to the sheriff, nothing the town would accept. To most, Timothy was still the orphaned nephew who worked hard and spoke kindly. Yet to Harding, each day made it clearer. The boy was not just unusual, he was dangerous. And unless someone uncovered proof, Sedalia would keep mistaking his silence for innocence, until the next tragedy struck. The turning point came with a single word. Timothy, in his usual offhand way, mentioned a cave. He said it was a place he went when he wanted to be alone, a quiet corner of the woods where no one would bother him. To most adults, it would have meant nothing. A child's hideaway. Why? No different from a treehouse or fort. But for Dr. Harding, it sparked an unease that refused to settle. He waited until Timothy was occupied on the farm and followed the boy's vague directions into the trees. What he found there would end any illusion that Sedalia's tragedies were accidents. The cave was shallow but deep enough to hide what Timothy had been doing. Bones littered the dirt floor, not scattered by chance, but arranged, sorted. Small animal skulls in one corner, rib cages stacked with a disturbing neatness. Crude tools lay beside them, farm implements sharpened into instruments of dissection. And then came the drawings, dozens of them, carefully rendered in Timothy's handwriting and detail. Birds with their wings broken at precise angles. Rabbits with notes about how long they lived after their eyes were removed. Squirrels with annotations about breathing patterns and vocalizations. Each page was not the work of a boy experimenting in ignorance. They were methodical, scientific, deliberate. Days later, Harding discovered how close the danger had come. When he entered the Caldwell farmhouse, Thomas and Sarah lay unconscious in their bed, their breathing shallow, their skin gray. Timothy admitted with almost cheerful pride that he had prepared them with herbs, just enough to keep them alive but helpless. "They won't wake for hours," he said. "That gives us time." He spoke with the composure of a lecturer beginning class. And then, with chilling clarity, he detailed his earlier crimes. How he pushed Mary's head under the creek water and held it there for 3 long minutes. How he loosened stones on Devil's Bluff and released bees into Henrik Len's face, knowing panic would send him backward over the edge. How he lured Jacob into the well with the promise of baby raccoons, then kept him alive for 4 days, bringing just enough water to prolong his suffering. Harding felt his blood freeze as Timothy spoke. There was no shame, no hesitation, only satisfaction, as though each death had been a successful experiment. When Harding asked what he planned next, Timothy's eyes lit up. "I need to know what happens when you hurt someone who trusts you completely," he said. The implication was unmistakable. His aunt and uncle were next. Before Harding could react, Timothy revealed his real ambition. He didn't just want to kill helpless family. He wanted Harding himself. "You understand me," the boy said. "That makes you perfect. I want to see what someone does when they know they're about to die. Do you fight? Do you sacrifice? Do you run?" As he spoke, Timothy moved around the room, gathering weapons, a rope, a candlestick, sharpened kitchen knives, arranging them with surgical precision. Harding drew his pistol, ordering the boy to stop. But Timothy only tilted his head and asked, almost playfully, "6 bullets, isn't it? And 6 people you're trying to protect?" His words made the room feel smaller, the air heavier. He was calculating odds, even as a child. When Timothy lunged at his sleeping uncle with rope in hand, Harding intercepted him. The struggle was sudden, violent, and shockingly even. The boy was smaller, but faster, stronger than expected, and frighteningly skilled with the blade he produced from his clothes. Harding fought desperately, his mind reeling at the realization that Timothy had hidden weapons around the house. The noise of the fight brought Sheriff Crawford and his deputies bursting through the door. Together they restrained the boy, binding him with ropes. Timothy sat bloodied but calm, his expression almost triumphant. "You can't prove anything," he said coldly. "Nobody will believe a child did all this." The sheriff stared down at him with a mix of disgust and dread. "Maybe not," he answered, "but trying to murder your family is enough." Timothy only smiled. "You won't hang me," he said. "I'm too young, too interesting. Someone will want to study me instead." And in that moment, Harding realized the boy wasn't afraid of capture. He was already thinking ahead, already treating it as the next stage in his experiment. Timothy was right. The law in 1867 had no answer for him. 8 years old was too young to hang, too young to be tried as an adult, but far too dangerous to send to any orphanage. The county debated, argued, stalled, until finally they reached a compromise. Timothy Caldwell would be sent to the Missouri State Hospital for the Insane in Fulton. Officially, it was for treatment. In truth, it was to keep him contained. Dr. Harding accompanied him, determined to watch, to learn, to see if anything in this boy could be explained or stopped. At first, Timothy adapted perfectly. He cried at the right times, spoke of remorse when staff asked, even thanked his caretakers with convincing gratitude. Nurses whispered that perhaps he was healing, that grief had twisted him, but he was slowly untangling. Harding, though, saw through it. He recognized the performance. The tears came too easily, the words too measured. Timothy wasn't changing, he was studying. Within weeks, strange incidents began. Older patients, once healthy, died suddenly of heart failure. 2 younger men suffered accidents that seemed unlikely. Both fell in areas where Timothy had been seen earlier. At night, patients reported waking to find him standing silently beside their beds, watching. Nurses started dreaming of him, nightmares so vivid they requested transfers. Still, administrators dismissed it as hysteria, the result of working too close to madness. Then came the discovery that erased all doubt. Dr. Fitzgerald, a visiting psychiatrist, found that Timothy had been keeping a journal. On the surface, it was filled with childish remorse, regrets, and hopes for rehabilitation. But beneath the innocent scrawl lay a cipher. When decoded, the entries revealed something chilling. Timothy was documenting the staff, their weaknesses, their habits, how long it took to earn their trust. He was using his time not to recover, but to sharpen his skills. In the summer of 1868, Timothy Caldwell vanished. The official story claimed he slipped away during a building transfer, but Harding knew better. This was not chance. It was planning, patience, precision. For 18 months, Timothy had mapped every weakness in the hospital, every guard's routine, every unlocked door. His escape wasn't desperation, it was graduation. When Timothy disappeared, the official files closed, but the fear never did. Dr. Harding spent the last decades of his life tracing whispers across the Midwest. Farm accidents too precise, children vanishing near wells, livestock slaughtered with unnatural neatness. None could be proven, yet all carried the same signature. It was as if Timothy had simply grown older, more practiced, and far harder to catch. Harding filled his journals with reports, not as evidence for court, but as warnings to the future. What unsettled him most was not just the deaths, but the boy's talent for deception. At the hospital, Timothy had mimicked emotions so convincingly that even trained physicians believed him. He cried on command, offered apologies he did not feel, and mirrored human warmth with terrifying accuracy. Harding wrote that Timothy had built a catalog of human expression, a library of masks he could wear at will. He didn't feel empathy, but he understood how to counterfeit it, how to use it to draw people closer before breaking them. The Caldwell farm was abandoned, left to rot in silence. Neighbors swore animals avoided the ground, that the soil itself felt cursed. The cave was sealed by Sheriff Crawford, but everyone who had seen inside carried its memory like a scar. As for Thomas and Sarah Caldwell, they changed their names and lived quietly until death, never speaking of the boy who had once slept under their roof. Their silence spoke volumes, fear that Timothy might someday return. In 1891, only days before his own death, Dr. Harding wrote his final reflection. He concluded that Timothy was not an aberration, not simply the product of trauma or loss. He was something far more disturbing, a glimpse of what humanity becomes without empathy, without conscience, stripped to raw intelligence and curiosity. Harding warned that if Timothy survived to adulthood, America might unknowingly harbor one of the most dangerous men in its history. And that is the question left behind. What became of Timothy Caldwell? Did he vanish into obscurity, or did his experiments continue under a different name, hidden among the tragedies we call accidents? The records give no answer. All we have are Harding's journals, and the unsettling reminder that evil does not always arrive with fangs or fury. Sometimes it comes in the form of a child, polite, smiling, and endlessly patient.